It's che0nsu versus Ryvius for match number 1 today, and I'm looking forward to this one just to see how che0nsu's solid play and just generally solid lineup goes up against, the mad genius Ryvius. So we can see there Warrior shielded and the Priest banned, or Priest lost for Ryvius, and then Priest shielded and the Shaman banned out for che0nsu. And normally I'd be like, wow, someone shielded Warrior, I dislike them, but not today, because this warrior is not your average control warrior, is it, Derek?
It is not. It is, for the most part, it looks like it. If you look at all the bottom cards in the deck, it's just a whole lot of removal. It's even a more removal-based version of warrior. But at the top end, there's Mechathune. This is just full-on Mechathune warrior, which we've seen a pretty small amount of in Grandmasters, a sprinkling here and there, more so in the specialist portion in Season 1 of Grandmasters rather than Season 2. But we've seen it a couple of times from Ryvius. He clearly sees something there that other players are missing. I guess for the most part, the fact that it can beat the mirror fairly easily with the Mechathune combo, and also, I guess, the idea that you can draw so heavily that you can just kill the druids with your combo.
Yeah, and that's the big question for me is I'm also surprised we've not seen it more this season, because honestly, I think Control Warrior is up there with one of the most submitted lists that across the board this season.
Yeah.
And if everyone's bringing Control Warrior, well, you don't even have to particularly ban it if you bring Mechathune, right? So it just means that you have like a bit more freedom with your ban, and I also think it's good even though it's Mechathune Warrior, so it has lost, it loses some removals, some mid-game tools, but I think it has enough removal and enough tools to actually still work as a Control Warrior list, right? So yeah, I think it's more strange that we don't see more Mechathune coming out here. But again, looking at the rest of Ryvius' list, the Holy Wrath piled in there with the Soup Vendor's a nice addition, but also just the Quest Shaman with that Walking Fountain, with that Plague of Murlocs, with that Youthful Brewmaster, which means he has a bit more power in a couple of different directions in his deck.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting way to go with the deck overall. And it is just classic Ryvius, because as we can see here, for the most part, it is pretty standard decks. But he just has that little signature twist on it. And the couple of times that we've seen Walking Fountain, it has been very strong.
Yeah.
I'm also a fan of any other way to abuse the effect of Mutate, which I think Walking Fountain does fantastically, being able to go for a couple of rushes in and then hopefully evolve up to a King Crush or something like that to get a bit of extra damage. I just think all over, I like what Ryvius is doing with his lineup. We'll just have to see how it shakes up.
Yeah, I think overall for me, Walking Fountain, like I've been playing some Big Shaman the last few days, and although I feel like Walking Fountain's only ever been used in either a hyper control deck or a deck that cheats it out in the form of control. In the form of Big Shaman. But for me, if you think about it, it's an 8 mana 4/8 with Rush, Wind Fury, and Lifesteal, and it's an elemental, so it has some extra on there with the tribe. It's actually just a solid card.
It's just very strong.
It's like an 8-drop that 2-for-1s nearly any board that exists, and also heals you. And sometimes, that one using one card that's a powerful card, even in a deck like Quest Shaman where you can only do a million things in a turn.
Yeah.
Maybe just having a whole turn as just one card actually ends up kind of increasing the value of your resources over time as well.
Yeah.
Let's get into it though. che0nsu on the top on the Quest Druid, Ryvius on the Mechathune Warrior.
Very curious to see how this shakes out for Ryvius, because I have to imagine the draw engine in this deck is not that strong. Acolyte of Pain can obviously draw you a good amount of cards with Warpath and Dynamatic, especially if you draw 2 of them. But it's a far cry from the likes of OTK Paladin or the builds of Druid that run Gadgets and Auctioneer as well. And so I think for Ryvius, the main thing isn't necessarily just going to be turbo drawing, it's going to be trying to find those removal pieces, because I don't think he'll be able to draw through his whole deck quickly enough without finding some serious removal for che0nsu's threats.
Yeah, and let's bear in mind, although obviously there are cuts that have to be made for playing Mechathune Warrior, Ryvius is still playing double Plague of Wrath, double Brawl, the Restless Mummies are there. There's actually a Militia Commander there as well, for even more, just on spot removal. So really, what a lot of the stuff Ryvius is missing is actually the late game stuff, which is the Tomb Ward, the Dr. Boom, the Elysiana, and stuff like that, which I think, although those cards are good, in the matchups you're aiming to be in with this warrior, they actually aren't needed.
Well, he does still have Dr. Boom in the deck.
Oh, sorry, yeah. I mean,
but yes, everything else, the Taunt package,
I think I was thinking about Bomb to Boom for some reason. I was looking at the late game minions and going like, oh yeah, the other one. But yes, just the late game and Taunt minions kind of lacking, but to get this combo seems fine. My overall point, though, is there's tons of removal in the deck.
Yeah. Ryvius, though, we can see clearly does value his removal, his card draw incredibly highly, more so than his removal. And I think this is fine because Warpath we very often see used early, and players then suffer for it because they can't activate their Plagues of Wrath. But Ryvius has 2 Whirlwinds in the deck as well, so I think using that to just draw 2 or 3 cards there, totally fine. Yeah.
And also, Ryvius just leaving this mummy on the board as is means that Oasis Surge is actually just, I would say, bad on
just
this
walks
turn.
into Dynamatic.
If this was an empty turn, you'd just play Oasis Surge on an empty board and feel fantastic if you're che0nsu.
Yeah.
But Ryvius has ensured that that is not the case.
Is he ever then... Oh no, because I was looking at if you ever go Innovate Hidden Oasis then, but that's like almost just as bad because it just runs into it twice.
It's
worse. That really doesn't feel good.
Doesn't, but even the Surger, he'd have to trade in them separately and make them 2 health, which is... Because if he didn't, then one's already dead anyway, and he's paying a 5-mana 5/5 flat.
Wow.
Okay. Well, there aren't the top minions in the deck, so maybe Starfall doesn't have that many targets.
This also, it does not kill off the second half,
No.
which I'm sure che0nsu will know. So this is purely just to like get a card out of hand and cheat out the Anubisat. Feels horrible though.
And also, you know, before you think, oh, well, he played around Dynamatic a bit. Not really.
Not really.
No.
Yeah. If anything, he's just played into Militia Commander and second Mummy as well. Well, I suppose both were very weak to this.
Also as well from che0nsu, he isn't playing anything too wacky in his quest druid. He's not playing MCT, he's not playing, you know, anything else. It's a pretty standard list. I'd say the thing that stands out is just the Crystal Power one-of, which is, again, not a card I personally like in the list. I don't really think it's needed that often, but I think it's more of an emergency card against heavy aggro.
Yeah,
It's not something you get value from with the hero power.
I think it's a card that could basically just be called Delete a Light Warden is really the point of it in the deck at the moment. Or maybe a Flame if you're playing in Asia Pacific. Oof.
Now that's a card.
Yes, that is the dream card.
There's
That
all the space in the world to play it as well.
The only thing that he needed. The only thing.
And also, we kind of slid over this a little bit, but double scenarios here. That's just an extra 1-card threat.
Yep. And that's exactly what che0nsu needs. It's not necessarily like value, although these of course do provide value. It's quick threats. He just needs to be able to get pressure on the board as quick as he can to make sure that he has he has the threats before Ryvius finds the remove.
Yeah, I mean, without oversimplifying this, che0nsu will want to just say, you need to remove this board. You need to remove this board. You need to remove this board. Every turn until he wins, pretty much, is the plan. And that sounds very simple. There are obviously different decisions that go into that. But that's what he has to do. He has to put pressure on Ryvius to make him use removal and not just cycle through his deck like he's doing now.
Ryvius here just turboing out his minions, though, even with all this removal in hand.
I like it, though, because after seeing... Like, think about this. che0nsu's nourished, and Ryvius is close enough to be the same on cards, which is pretty decent.
That is an active Zephyrus with 14 cards left in deck. That's nuts. And honestly, as much as we're surprised by that, I think Ryvius is going to be far more surprised when it kills him with a Savage Roar, because you don't really play around Zephyrus when there's 14 cards left in deck. This is the point where you say, okay, I can allow this on board because Zephyrus isn't active.
Yeah, it's really tough, isn't it? Because you just can't expect someone to be halfway through the deck and have drawn, you know, all of their one copy of at least of all of their duplicate cards. Because Druid isn't a deck that's really been thinned down much because of Zephyrus. I know, for example, the Highlander Control Warrior is thinned a little bit because, well, say Highlander Control Warrior. The Control Warriors that run Zephyrus is quite thin, but it does have duplicates, whereas Druid doesn't. Like, Druid has almost all duplicates. It just runs Zephyrus because it draws its deck enough. And this is just a setup to win the game.
I'm kind of surprised.
Bloodlust, that's enough, right?
Yeah. This feels like very all-in, though, from che0nsu. I think, given that Ryvius runs 2 Brawls, 2 Plague of Wraths, it's super unlikely that this sticks about on board.
Oh, it's actually not lethal, is it? Never mind.
Right, and if it's not even lethal, then... I don't know.
Yeah, so it's 16, it's 32 on board, plus 2 from the weapon, plus 2 from the... I think he's 36, and he's on 38.
Okay. But, yeah, if it... Whether it's lethal or not, I think che0nsu can expect this to be dealt with fairly easily, and therefore I was wondering if it was a swipe plus Oasis Surge turn instead, just because you want to put enough stuff on the board every turn rather than overextending.
Is he okay though? Because is this classed as overextending if his next turn Scenarios, his turn after Scenarios? You know what I mean? Like, because also you don't want the board to die to just a swing of the weapon and then a Dynamatic, right?
Yeah.
Because that's also almost worse than overcommitting onto the board and forcing a Brawl or a Plague or something like that, right?
Right.
If you don't do enough, then they just don't need to clear it.
Yes.
And then the game carries on.
Right. I completely understand, but I think that maybe Scenarios on its own is not enough. Like, and I get that it's threatening another Scenarios on top of it, but if you just go for 2 Oasis Surges, it doesn't really die to anything because the swipe took out the minions. It's 2 5/5s. That's difficult to clear off. At the same time, that there is obviously a downside to that, in that, like you said, it's not as much pressure.
Time is something that che0nsu's a little bit worried about.
That's fair.
Because in the meantime, although you always think, well, oh, well, you know, Ryvius has to get to 0 cards. Well, in doing so, he plays some pretty good cards himself, right? He drops a 10-10 at some point because he actually normally does the combo with the Undertaker, which means he drops a 10-10 Mechathune. If che0nsu doesn't have that big a board and say Booms live, that trades and then so on and so on. So I think che0nsu would rather finish this game up sooner rather than later, of course.
That's fair. It's valid to say that you have to go all in early to be able to win the game. My point was only that I think it was arguably enough pressure with just 1 Oasis Surge already, and that the scenarios on top of that would have been enough pressure to demand a removal anyway.
There's the Mechathune just to get it in the pool. No, it's not a misplay. Gets it in the pool. The Undertaker then has the Death Rattle of the Mechathune, so he does the combo later if he needs to.
This is just a 10-10, which does a pretty good job actually of threatening this board. Even if it just soaks up a Loti, it's a pretty big threat dealt with.
Yeah. And also he just has Warpath Plague next turn.
There you go.
So if che0nsu does commit to the board, then the whole board says bye-bye. And it's always interesting, the discussion of how much is enough on the board to threaten enough to use a big AoE. Because I feel like it's also quite subjective, right? Each player will have their own opinion on how much they think they can take.
Yeah.
Because it's not as if you can even say there's always a 100% correct answer.
Right.
Because...
Well, no, of course, yeah.
Because it's like, well, there's so many variables. A lot of it is you do it by feel, don't you? You go, okay, so there's 10 on the board. If he plays this, this, or this, I'm in trouble. If he doesn't play that, I'm okay. And a lot of those decisions, I feel, are quite personal to the player playing the game at any given time. It's a tough one.
che0nsu just trying to do everything he can, though, here by trying to develop without playing these scenarii to make sure that he can use them to push for lethal.
Yeah, he wants the buff as opposed to the actual minions, doesn't he?
And to be fair to him, this looks like it's working. This is a game plan that is less susceptible to removal because it's just constant little bits of chip damage. And I think this is something I like a lot, of just trying not to overcommit, because the 2 minions that he stuck last turn, because Ryvius felt comfortable in committing playing the Mechathune, sorry, netted him a lot of damage there, and it chips away incredibly quickly, as we can see.
Now though there is, Dynamatic Plague again, and he gets it. There's also was just Dynamatic Ziliax, maybe with a swing of the weapon helps.
Yeah.
That could have healed him up a lot. And look how fast he's...
Wow.
I'll take Scenarios number 20, please.
Obviously some consideration for Nourish, given that it's not a bad card here, and King Feoris, but I think I can agree. The immediate burst damage that Scenarios
and also,
you is huge.
What you're drawing into is actually not that great anymore, right?
Yeah, it was mainly the Feoris.
Yeah, but then he'd do nothing that turn, right? Oh, I guess he still plays
Scenarios.
Yeah, I guess. There is still an Elise in the deck, though. So there is potential for Elise into, which kind of naturally buffs Feoris if you do it on a Feoris hand, because you get the spells twice as well, so it makes the initial Feoris bigger. And now there's Brawl. Look how fast these guys are playing.
Yeah, removal.
It's just,
after
I'm making a
removal.
board, I'm clearing that board. I'm making another board, I'm clearing that board. I'm making another board, I'm clearing that board too.
And it does kind of just feel like Ryvius, with the vast majority of his card draw expended, I don't know if he's going to survive 7 turns.
It's going to be a long time, isn't it?
It's so annoying because he has the combo in hand. He just can't do it, of course.
Bear in mind as well, Dr. Boom is one of his cards, which will help him survive if need be.
Yeah.
Jewels of the sound.
There's Elise though.
Just got to outlast these threats. Is Floop in the bottom 2 cards now?
It has to be. It
Bottom
has to be
1?
bottom card, yeah.
Because it hasn't been played yet, I don't think, has it?
That belongs in a museum.
Well, that one helps.
That does help a lot. This is going to be
I
close
know,
as
it's
anything.
Straight to the wire, isn't it?
Wow.
Also, Geppetto will draw 2 more cards,
Yeah.
potentially.
If there are even, I don't even know if there are minions left in the deck.
I honestly just don't.
No idea. Whirlwind doesn't do much.
He just
but,
has
like,
to boom,
yeah.
right?
He has to hold on to the Devastate, I think,
Because
as well.
what you've got to remember as well, Ryvius has to play all these cards to win the game.
Yeah.
So he has to play them at some point. And my biggest worry is, depending on what's left in his deck, of course, when does he get the opportunity to play Geppetto and not die?
Right.
And if you think, although Ryvius had, I think, good early and decent mid game with all the removal, he hadn't drawn Boom or Geppetto to like bottom 5 cards or
Yeah.
something. Like that's a little bit unfortunate because Boom always, of course, naturally makes your draws better, and then also Geppetto can potentially free up some more removal because it can make Undertaker cheaper, which means that you don't need to save, say, a Devastate for the Undertaker.
I wonder how good cards like Boom and Geppetto would have been, though, because the things that Ryvius needed in the early game were exactly the cards he had. He needed removal turn after turn, or he would have just died. And he didn't really have many mechs, you know, to be rushing in with Dr. Boom.
I mean, there aren't that many mechs in the deck, right?
Exactly,
but I just think if there was one leeway turn to get Boom down, it would have been pretty big, because then his Dynamatic gets rush, he could maybe, you know, summon some minions, or even just gain armor again. So I do agree that Ryvius had some great removal, like on curve, basically, for every turn. I guess you've got to wind it all the way back to che0nsu discovered 2 extra scenarios this game, which I think caused Ryvius to have to remove every single turn.
Yeah.
Welp.
It's just not quite there. The
not.
4 removal pieces just aren't enough against this deck, it would seem. When they're drawing this quickly and find all their threats so fast.
And the problem now is che0nsu doesn't have infinite Feoris, but enough to win the game, because he could keep playing Elise, depending on how he threw out these spells. But che0nsu takes a win, and that game went by in lightning fashion. And I think both players actually just did what they had to do.
Yeah.
I think, obviously, you know, you were talking about the double Surger turn. There we go. But we're wondering whether that was too much or not. But either way, I think both players just did a good job, and che0nsu, Ryvius just didn't quite get there.
Yeah, I really don't have too much of a gripe with che0nsu's play. It was really just a thought that maybe could have got away with that because he has the ever-looming threat of Cenarius. But I think, as we can clearly tell, even when you're running all those threats, discovering 2 scenarios off of the 2 worthy expeditions, you just can't beat that.
Because also, you look how bad his Feoris would have been if he had to play it. Because if he didn't get 2 more scenarios, then he would have had to play Feoris, and then everything gets a little bit worse. But anyway, that was not the case, and che0nsu, continuing to dominate, takes a 1-game lead versus Ryvius. We're going to be back in just a few minutes to continue this series of che0nsu versus Ryvius.
What's up, Hearthstone fans? Welcome back to another episode of The Curve, where we draw the biggest headlines from this past weekend on Curve. I'm your host, Simon Sottle-Welch. Let's do this. After the format change to the 2nd season of Grandmasters, the playoffs now allow for the top 4 players from each division to advance to the final stage of the season, With this additional spot available, players can clinch spots earlier in the season. che0nsu in the Asia-Pacific region is 9-1 in Division A. His continued stellar play locked him in as the first player to clinch playoffs in all of the regions. In Division B, we'll have to wait another week to see the playoff picture settle down, as all of the players are very close in the standings. Reigning world champion Hunter was the second player to qualify for playoffs this weekend, as he won both of his matches. Again. The champ is truly firing on all cylinders and is looking like the favourite to claim the last European spot going to BlizzCon later this year. In the division over, che0nsu, who led the last season in match score, continues to struggle. He's dropped his last 8 matches in a row and is currently sitting in last place. In the Americas region, none of the players have officially qualified for playoffs just yet. Just che0nsu was close this weekend, but lost to Amnesiac on Sunday night. In both divisions, the competition is getting stronger. Amnesiac in particular, who started the season 1-4, has won his last 5 matches and was even able to beat the #1 player in his division. The region as a whole is going to have some very decisive results this coming weekend, and every game matters because of tiebreakers, so be ready for some intense matches. With the season closing, there is also the flip side of the tournament, where the last place players will be getting relegated from Grandmasters. Every player is fighting for their tournament lives, so keep an eye out for ETC, Race, che0nsu, Viper, Blood Trail, and Patra, as many of them are in must-win situations to keep themselves from getting relegated. In this week's meta moment, we want to highlight Highlander decks. The current Highlander decks that were brought this weekend are Warrior, Mage, and Hunter. The key component of these decks is that they only have one of any individual card. Key cards in these decks usually consist of things like Zephyrus the Great, Tiamat, and class-specific cards such as this expansion's versions of Elise, Reno, or Bran. Each deck is powerful in their own ways, and if you haven't tried them, take a look at Firebat's VODs and deck lists from this past week to see 2 different Highlander decks in action. If you missed any of the Grandmasters action, you can check out the VODs on our YouTube page, youtube.com/Hearthstone Esports. Grandmasters resumes this weekend. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. That's it for us. We'll see you in the tavern.
Back to Hearthstone Grandmasters. We're moving into game number 2 of match number 1 of the day between che0nsu and Ryvius. And che0nsu is only 1 game away from actually just going, what, 10-1 so far in Grandmasters? And honestly, you could say, oh, well, it's just, 1 set of results or whatever. But if you look at it, he's basically on par with Hunter, the current world champion, obviously playing a different region. But it's just an incredible feat in itself. Just winning that much across a field of very strong players is pretty sick.
It really is. The first player, I believe, in Season 2 of Grandmasters to lock in his playoffs place, as he now has. And I imagine he's going to have his eyes set on being the first player to lock in first seed going into playoffs as well, as we head into playoffs in a couple of weeks' time here in Grandmasters. And if he's going to do so, he's got a pretty good matchup.
He has. So, there are ways this matchup can go wrong for the Priest, but honestly, at least personally, you can talk. You've probably played a bit more Priest than I have, but I don't know what to do as Shaman in this matchup. I feel like even though I do the things that are the best I can possibly achieve, my record versus Priest with this deck is abysmal.
Yep, it's a miserable matchup. I fully agree.
Well, I thought for the longest time it was me. Like, am I just doing this that my win rate's so bad? But
Yeah.
you know, is the matchup that bad? Is it one of the worst?
It depends on how you're teching and how you're playing as well. First of all, you have to know what to look to do in the matchup, which is to try and lock down the board as quick as you humanly can. You don't care about value, you don't care about setting up for like mind control techs a lot of the time, shuttle walks. You just want to be doing the most powerful things on the board as quick as you can, which very often comes in the form of Mogu. Is the premier card, especially with Mutate if you can get that. But any kind of good lackeys you can generate, obviously a Wasp, if you can hit that on the board on curve, is huge. And also you kind of just need to pray that the priest gets bad hand.
Right, and there are a few highlight reel plays you can do, like this ethereal lackey. If you look at a card like, say, it gets Hex, well, not only do you
That
deal with a
helps.
minion,
Yeah.
you put a frog in the pool of resurrections from Psycho Pump, which again is pretty big. Although the last time I did it this past week, the person killed me with the frog, on which don't want to talk about. You know, there are ways it can go wrong, but there are ways it can go quite right, and Voltaic
That's
Burst
right.
that leads straight into a Mogu on this turn is actually
That is
pretty sick.
insane!
Oh, with the mutate as
With
well.
the Mutate, that was the perfect sequence of cards for
Look
Ryvius
at
there.
che0nsu.
You can't believe it!
My hands now.
Honestly, I love Ryvius. I love watching Ryvius play so much, and I'm glad he's one of the players who's consistently had a camera available or that worked. Because honestly, I feel like he's every Hearthstone player. He gets so angry when things are going bad,
Yeah.
but when things are going good, he's like, oh, hey, nice play. You know, and it's just so funny to watch. I love it.
Yeah, he's well aware what's happening right now. He knows that he is truly cheesing his opponent in a very effective
And
way.
he loves it.
Oh yeah, he's
There's still
here for
problems
it.
though, because I spy an Amet on board, which is a little bit scary, although that is a great card for it as well. And there's, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, Derek, there's no world in which you don't kill Amet.
There's some considerations, like leaving an Amat on 1 health can of course mess with the health pools on minions they're trying to play. Like of course Tolvira and Injured Blade Master just kill themselves at that point, and all the 1-drops don't really get any buff. However, when you're messing with Nephicet Ritualist, Circle of Healing, even just a sidekick,
Sorry. you see
you have to be very
full
careful.
prey.
I did, and then just a little boogie
Yeah.
when the cleric comes down. That's the happiest I've ever seen anyone be in response to a Northshire cleric.
I know, yeah. Please, I need healing. I need healing. I need healing.
Especially as
Wow.
he's just got
And-
the board. This
and
is what you have to do.
And honestly, especially with the Sandstorm element on the board, when I said there were some highlight reel sort of plays and games,
Yeah.
this is one of them. This
Right.
does not happen generally at
No,
all.
Yeah. And well, this is kind of the thing that I've been doing all weekend so far with Jambre Shaman
Yes,
instead of
yeah.
Quest Shaman, because that version of the deck, I suppose, or just any kind of non-quest tempo shaman, like token shaman, I guess you could call it as well, that runs the Thunderhead and the Lick Him, it just makes for a
Yeah.
very, very strong ability to dominate the board.
And also, if you think Voltaic Burst was the big card in this game, well, that deck actually plays Voltaic
Right.
Burst in the deck, so you don't have to try and discover it by trying to get an Ethereal Lackey and so on. You just play stuff like that, whereas this is effectively everything going right for Ryvius, as well as him executing it well, of course. I'm not taking anything away from Ryvius, but you can only do these plays if the cards are offered to you.
And that's why I'm such a big fan of the lineup of Mr. George Lee Weberkus this week in actually bringing the Jambre token shaman to prey on them priests.
What if after all this, che0nsu just tops and wins anyway?
No. I ban that from happening.
Yeah, not with a Cobalt Lackey in hand. It's a lot of respect, though. And don't get me wrong, che0nsu,
Rightly so.
if Priest has got no cards, they cannot win. But like Ryvius has just dunked a ton of stuff into that.
Right, because I mean, if he didn't kill off, he would be playing with fire, just saying Divine
be
Spirit, and he'd just die. Yeah. Or I guess it would be 1 off, but even so, you don't want to be messing with that.
Walking Fountain again. Just yes, it's not broke or won or failed this game, but just a nice card to say, actually, I can push more damage face and give you less time because this minion has rush.
che0nsu playing it out like a champ because some reason with double Psycho Pomp and the Amet gone down, I don't think there's any avenue to victory for him. Ryvius just did what the deck needs to do. It needs to ignore, for the most part, the quest part of the deck completely. And just go all in on the token.
The quest side was more a byproduct.
Yeah, the quest.
Getting procs than anything else. There's the shoulda walk as well. On curve.
Ever mulligan quest versus priest? That must just be wrong. I've never even thought of that before, and
It wouldn't be the most upset I've ever been.
like, it's not just bad, right? Because in the old quest decks with the Ungoro quest, there were a few matchups that you mulliganed the quest with, right? Like control quest warrior.
Yeah.
You got rid of the quest a lot of the time. Quest druid, sometimes you did as well.
Yeah, I
Probably just
honestly, like I said, if someone did it, I would not be like, God, worst play ever. Because there's complete logic to it, right? If you spend turn 1 playing a quest, your opponent plays a cleric, well, that could have been either a turn 1 play yourself, or just any other card that's more useful than 1 mana do nothing. Because you even see in that matchup, which was, you know, pretty one-sided, but the quest didn't really have that much impact. Like
really
the kobold did a bit of extra damage, but I don't think that would have changed the outcome of the game anyway. So it wouldn't be the most upset I've ever been about a mulligan play. I'm more upset about most of my mulligan plays actually, but that is going to even up the series as well in a very, very quick fashion. Even a sort of late game warrior's been played, and we're still blitzing through the series. Pretty crazy.
Yeah, we really are. The priest is still left up now, of course, now that it's taken a loss for che0nsu, which was something that Ryvius took into account. You have to be able to have an answer to these priests, which he did in his Shaman deck as well. If he hadn't gone for the victory, which was the more likely one with Mogus and dominating the board, he has a Plague of Murlocs in his deck, so he could have maybe answered if things had gone very wrong in that fashion. So I wonder if now he heads into his warrior instead to try and counteract the priest.
See, funny enough, this was literally what I was going to ask you. What do you think's a better deck? Mecha Thune Warrior or Holy Wrath Paladin? Because Holy Wrath Paladin has some fantastic answers to Priest. It can just nullify the minions, right?
Against Priest and Warrior.
It's got timeout. It's got heal to maybe stay above potential reaches from Priest.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying it's the best deck in the world against Priest, but considering there are some cards for Ryvius that will do nothing versus Priest, like Undertaker, Mechathune, those cards will not get played until the game has been decided.
Yeah. I agree. There are some very bad cards in the matchup, but I think I still agree with Ryvius's decision, as we just got confirmation, of going with the Warrior, because you have to factor in, obviously, not the Priest, which could be played by che0nsu, but also his other deck in the Warrior. And I think for both of those decks, I'd rather have the Mechathune Warrior, just because it gives you a really good ability to, of course, lock down that board early on versus the Priest. And if he were to try and go for mind games and queue the Warrior instead, Ryvius would, of course, have the late game combo win condition. So I think Ryvius has the right idea.
Okay, well, let's get into the deciding game here. che0nsu, 1 game away from going 10-1. Ryvius, the guy standing in the way, wanted to even up his score for 6-6 throughout Grandmasters Season 2, and he's got off to a... Okay, che0nsu has a very good start.
Yeah.
But I think Ryvius' start isn't horrible, mainly because he has a mummy available, which is, for me, step number 1.
Yeah, it just wreaks havoc with everything the Priest can do early on. For the most part, there's a couple of things that I think che0nsu can do here if he plays his cards right to mess that up. How he goes about that, of course, is very difficult because he has so many different branching plays here. I like playing the Cleric on 1 as opposed to Coin Tolvir into Nephicet. That's like sometimes the play you make against high aggro decks, but I think given that this is more of a control deck, wow, yeah, you take it a little slower.
Coin Blade Master Circle. Or Coin 2-drop, 1-drop Circle. The options are endless. Derek,
can he ever get away with just Coin Tolvir Light Warden Pass and not play the Circle of Healing? Because Blade Master next turn is huge, and what's the punish here? Hero Power Shield Slam on the Cleric?
I wondered whether
that's pretty bad.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
It's only that, though, I think. Like everything else, Weapons Project, who cares? You have a 2/3 Taunt in the way. You don't care about, of course, the Warpath. Even Warpath plus Whirlwind is fine.
Oh, does he need to play Blade Master? I guess there's no punishment this turn.
What did you want to see instead? Light Inner Fire?
Maybe an Inner Fire?
I think
don't
given that
know.
it's going into the mummy turn, you kind of want to use the Tolvir as a shield rather than actually making that your threat.
True. So, my next question. Are you ever surprised that, say, a Whirlwind wasn't played that turn? Or do you think Ryvius is just hard-locking Brawl to set up for a Brawl?
Right.
And because, yes, one minion could be healed, but he's already seen one circle of healing. So basically, che0nsu would say, which one minion would I want to live through a Plague?
Yeah.
Because that might change based on, like, does he keep the Cleric alive because it's his card drawer engine? Does he keep the Tolvir alive because it's his biggest minion? So on. Maybe those questions could get asked. I don't know.
I think given that Whirlwind Plague of Wrath is a play on turn 6, for if anything big is developed into it, I like this from Ryvius. Again, nodding his head at the Cleric, Ryvius loves these Clerics. Maybe not
Nice
so much.
answer as well. Ryvius has the Whirlwind into Plague, which is a great answer to this Never set. And it only drew one card
It did,
with
but
this heal.
che0nsu doesn't have to do all that much to be getting lethal with a Psycho Pomp in hand. And what's he got in the Resurrect pool? Like 2 Blade Masters, a Psycho Pomp?
Yeah, he.
Oh, it's 2 Blade Masters and a Tolvir. Sorry,
Ryvius
this
has
is
got
good
some
stuff.
stuff as well, though, right?
Yeah,
he
yeah,
has
it's
Mummy,
close.
he has Dynomatic. Like, he's got Shield Block to draw more. He's got Warpath if he needs to just spam Warpath out, depending on what this summons.
I guess the real big thing that's missing for him, and that's a very bad outcome, the one thing he's missing is single target removal. So from che0nsu there, if we had seen a Tolvir or a injured Blade Master there, I would have been very, very happy to see a Divine Spirit on it, just to make it that little bit more survivable.
Yeah, I was going to say his Mummy is single target removal, right? Like, that's literally what Ryvius has in total.
Yes,
Right
yeah,
now.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know, if you can go past 6 health, you feel significantly safer.
You are golden. Obviously, che0nsu doesn't know that, but given that there's not any executes in the deck, like, it's really only Plague of Wrath and Brawl, and he's seen one of these.
And I like this as well, although you could think that, the Warpath seems a bit of a waste.
Yeah.
It's effectively cleared the minion, like, it's so safe now.
Very low
Yeah,
value.
so he has to just go all in, doesn't he?
As in heal,
Everything.
arm, spirit, yeah, maybe.
Yeah. I just think he has to, like,
What does that go up to? 5, 10? Yeah, that's probably just correct. Just trying
because
to
it only gets worse, doesn't it?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the problem. Like, every turn if you play Acolyte, well, it's dead unless you buff it. But if you buff in Acolyte, then I don't know, it's not very active on board.
What about beaming sidekick, double arms? It pushes more attack, but obviously gives you a little bit less health.
Hey,
Yeah, okay.
I got you, friend.
So we're saving it in Divine Spirit.
Speak to me.
His trading was that?
Interesting.
He wants this Acolyte to get buffed, maybe? Just trying to defend it.
I was definitely expecting the all-in.
No tune can hold me.
Because I feel like this way, you know, so much goes wrong with this. Whether it's Ziliax or obviously the Restless Mummy as well. Even just leaving it on board, like you can just wait for the removal to come down. Nothing's going to happen.
Oh, okay. We can
That
talk.
is the draw he
We can
needed.
talk again.
That is one after the other, the exact 2 draws that che0nsu needed. Things have turned around now.
Bronsamdi into the, obviously drawing the 1-drops, but having Amit
I got you, friend.
exactly there.
Yep.
And it's a recovery point from che0nsu choosing to drop the Acolyte that turn.
Plague of Wrath. He of course knows that there's 1-drops in hand, but he doesn't know there's the Amit knocking about as well. And he probably correctly just throws it down here to deal with the 7 attack minion.
Yeah, I think that's priority number 1, because to be fair, he's seen a lot of health buffs right now.
Yeah.
So it's unlikely that this is exactly Amit and Divine Spirit. We can see, of course, it is. But I don't blame Ryvius for that one. I think that was fine.
I think so too. But the problem is, until he finds a brawl, he is not dealing with this board at all. It is going to be farming him.
Does he just go boom? Is that actually his highest outcome? Of good follow-up. Get some Russian mechs.
What does Geppetto even get?
I'll make you a real
No Devastators in the deck. A Spellbreaker? not
Undertaker
running
and
it, yeah.
Mechathune. The dream. Well, at least you can Mechathune and attach Zilliax to it.
Yes, he can. And silence wouldn't matter because the minion still dies, and so the death rattle goes to...
I think most importantly, silence would be okay as long as you weren't dead that turn, because it becomes a 10-10.
True.
You know what I mean?
Forgot about that.
Yeah, it's a 4-3 like Mechathune with Russian lifesteal. Silence.
That would be great.
Wait. Like,
Hold up.
double silence now for che0nsu, so he has basically just 2 turns of, or 2 goes at ignoring a minion, basically.
How much damage is that now? 18 plus the 3? Lethal, right?
Yes. That looks like it is to me.
We'll do it.
Wow, and out of nowhere. It looked good for Ryvius for just
really
a second, but Buon Samdi into exactly Amit with, of course, the draws of the 1-drops. I honestly, like, you know, fantastic for che0nsu, going 10-1, looking
Insane.
great at the top of his
Insane.
division in Asia Pacific. Like, you can't even see second place at this point, he's so far ahead. But I do feel a little bit bad for Ryvius, where I feel like he got, you know, maybe the rough end of the stick there a little bit. I thought he was doing well, but just exactly Buon Samdi into Amit just changed everything. If one of those cards was missing, I think the game just ends within 2 turns, but in Ryvius's favor.
I agree. It was a very, very nice draw for his opponent there. But this is where you maybe have to start wondering about the preparation that Ryvius put in, because so much of Hearthstone is about what you do before you even step into a game. And therefore, bringing the Mechathune Warrior, clearly it has some advantages. We're talking about the mirror primarily and some of the other slightly slower matchups. But I think maybe it's worth making the argument that against the likes of Druid, where he was really struggling there, and Priest, having that little bit of extra late game ability to lock it down with the obviously our Megadillo and Tomb Wardens would have given him the chance to just put a big minion in play and not have to remove every turn because he's just killing his opponent.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because if we just take that one game, just, you know, obviously very, very tiny sample size, and say, well, actually, che0nsu was running double silence in his list, so maybe the taunts actually wouldn't have been as good, even if our Megadillo came down, or if there was a silence 1 out of 2, which seems okay. Then it gets ignored and pushed anyway, and then how much does the Megadillo being on the board change the outcome? I don't know. It's obviously impossible to find out. But, yeah, it's just interesting. I feel like the heavy removal side of it was fine for Priest, and Ryvius didn't lose too much. I just think the removal looked so good for most of the game, and he'd removed everything. There were loads of health buffs gone, and then Buon Samdi into Amit hit the board. It changed everything. But that was just match number 1 of the day. We've got 4 more for you guys before we are done for this Saturday. And next up,